The countdown is on. President Trump set to deliver his State of the Union address tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Let's get to Eamon Javers in Washington. He can give us a little bit of a preview of what to expect. Eamon, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Becky. Better late than never, right? You remember that they had trouble getting this State of the Union address together during the government shutdown. Now, the president will be able to deliver the full-dress State of the Union tonight in the House of Representatives chamber up on Capitol Hill. Let's start with what we don't know about what the president is going to say here tonight. We don't know whether the president is going to announce a visit to North Korea. A lot of speculation that he might do that tonight, a visit to meet with Kim Jong-un someplace in Asia, possibly Vietnam. Keep an eye out for that one. And the other thing we don't know is whether the president will use tonight's address to discuss a possible state of emergency in terms of building a border wall. That's something that aides have been talking about a lot privately. Not clear whether tonight is the venue to make that announcement or not. So keep an eye out for that possible piece of newsmaking tonight during the State of the Union. And then here's what we do know ultimately. A couple of senior administration officials talking to reporters over the past couple of days have laid out some of the topics that the president will discuss. So we know he's going to talk about immigration in terms of the border wall, of course, but also in terms of a broader approach. The aides say the president's going to strive for an inclusive and bipartisan tone here. He's going to talk about trade, possibly update us on where things stand with China. Infrastructure is something that the president, I'm told, is looking forward to doing this year if he can get a deal with Democrats. They're going to talk about lowering health care and prescription drug costs. And then finally, national security is a topic for this president, especially emphasizing, we're told tonight, the idea of ending America's endless foreign wars. That all of those topics, guys, are things that people inside the Trump administration believe there is at least some common ground with Democrats on. They feel that they can reach out and do sort of a bipartisan bridge building exercise here tonight and try to find some common ground on all of those areas. Now, we know as hyper-partisan as Washington is today, a lot of eyes will be on the reception to this, the sort of seesaw applause that we've seen in previous States of the Union. That might be exacerbated tonight. We'll wait and see what the theatrics are in the room. And meanwhile, speaking of in the room, last night the president had dinner in the White House residence with the Fed chair, Jay Powell. We were told that there were 4 people at this dinner last night. The president, Jay Powell, the Fed chair, Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, and Richard Clarida, the Vice Chair of the Fed. All 4 people, we're told, had a good discussion of the issues. I'm told there were no pitchforks during the course of that meeting. You know, the president's been very critical of the Fed, very critical of Jay Powell, not liking the idea of Powell raising interest rates. We're told the president was very happy last week with the Fed's decision to leave rates unchanged. So perhaps that was a topic of discussion as well. Not a lot more detail, but interesting how this rolled out last night. The Fed put out a statement about that dinner very, very quickly after the dinner wrapped last night. So the Fed anxious to get that one on the record, saying at the president's invitation, Chair Powell and Vice Chair Clarida joined the president and the Treasury Secretary for an informal dinner tonight in the White House residence to discuss, they say, recent economic developments and the outlook for growth, employment, and inflation. Chair Powell's comments in this setting were consistent with his remarks at his press conference of last week. He did not discuss his expectations for monetary policy except to stress that the path of policy will depend entirely on incoming economic information and what that means for the outlook. So the Fed there going out of its way to stress that everything was right and proper about that dinner last night. The White House confirming that they did have a dinner and saying to me that there were no pitchforks from the president's perspective during the course of the conversation. And we're told they had steak for dinner, guys.
Hey, Eamon, going back to the State of the Union, I do expect, as you hinted, that this is going to be theatrics tonight. I don't expect he'll get a warm reception from the Democrats for any of those proposals. But some of them really are areas where they might be able to find common ground, speaking specifically about anything to try and address drug prices or health care increases in cost, maybe infrastructure too, maybe finding ways to reach out. Do you think that behind the scenes there is any potential reception from the Democrats to ideas to kind of working together on some of those things, or is this still about a standoff?
Yeah, I feel that behind the scenes it's just as difficult as it is in front of the scenes, right? I mean, because you take an issue like infrastructure, which in theory both parties have a lot of incentive to cooperate on. Politicians traditionally love spending money, but these two parties live on such different planets when they approach these issues. Take the idea of environmental regulation around infrastructure. You know, a Republican bill might have a lot less environmental regulation and might have some ways to sort of strip out some environmental regulation in order to get infrastructure built more quickly. Democrats, you could never see them going for something like that. So even as you get to an area where they would presumably agree, there are details there.
That's actually why I put infrastructure second. What about drug pricing? It seems like they may have some areas where they actually agree on things.
Yeah, I think drug pricing is one where it might be more likely to get an agreement. But again, the devil's in the details, and there are a lot of lobbyists in this town who will be all over that one. And those things can be sometimes difficult to separate sort of the lobbyists from the fundamental issue at stake.
Eamon, Ben White reporting in his Morning Money newsletter this morning that one of the tax the president plans to take is one against socialism, which is an issue we keep increasingly hearing about, especially given some of the tax policies that have been raised by folks like AOC and Elizabeth Warren and others. How much of that is a real issue that gets talked about in the White House in terms of what might be described as a lurch left, not just within the Democratic Party, but also increasingly among polls and the public?
Well, they love it in the White House, right? I mean, they love that the Democrats are making this lurch to the left and that there's a visible sort of hard left element of the Democratic Party up on Capitol Hill now that's elected, it's holding office, and therefore can be held accountable, right? The president needs a foil. This is a president who sees himself very much as a fighter, thrives in a fighting environment. In the first 2 years of his presidency, he had all Republican control on Capitol Hill, didn't quite know what to do with that in terms of that fighting persona. Now he's got a foil, and he's got something to contrast himself against. They love that, and they love it in the setup to 2020 as well.
And then finally, what do you know about David Malpass as a potential president of the World Bank?
Well, we know that he's the pick. I'm told by a senior administration official last night that the president likes his experience. The president values his insights. This is somebody who was on the Trump campaign, was a Trump transition official, somebody who I'm told shares the president's views in terms of the World Bank. Now, there are critics of Malpass, including some former George W. Bush officials, who suggest that Malpass is, if anything, hostile to the World Bank itself. Administration officials last night dismissing that criticism, saying he's their guy and they like this choice.
Picked by Ivanka?
I don't know. Ultimately, I'm told the president valued his experience. But how did the president come to value that experience? That's an interesting nuance.
And Indra Nooyi completely out of the running?
Yeah, out of the running, and you know, aides were sort of dismissive of her name when it first surfaced last week, and you got the sense that perhaps she'd been critical of the president in the past, and that might have been a hurdle that they couldn't get over.